Well, hello everyone. Um, I am Jane Peterson, and I want to welcome you to this webinar. It's lovely to see some familiar faces here and also some faces that are new on this journey. I'm just going to give a short introduction to myself while people are joining the room here because people are still coming in. Lots of people are still coming in. So I am, this is the What the Body Knows webinar. So if that's what you are looking for, you're in the right place. And this is about a half hour plus a little time for questions webinar. We're going to zip through some material today. I have been involved in the personal change field for about 3 decades and exploring this topic of embodiment and what it means to be human for almost 20 years now. I've been training systemic constellation work for it's now over 20 years, which is kind of shocking, but there it is. And my doctoral studies also took me deeper into this neck of the woods, into meaning making and embodiment, what it means to be human. And what I realized at some point is over the years, my understanding of myself, my understanding of what human beings are, what we actually are, changed significantly, like completely sea change from where I was. And so I've been trying to figure out how to actually explain this change because I also realized that it's made my work a lot more effective. That this way of seeing human beings has changed the way I work significantly. So I now can see the somatic signals that people send. I understand the story that the body is telling me. I'm able to work with it. It's a very direct and powerful way to work with people. It's just kind of become incorporated into my way of working. So I'm trying to figure out how to actually communicate this in the tiny little box of a Zoom window to you. And so I can't obviously give you what I've gained over decades of exploration and study in a half-hour webinar, but I can introduce you to some of the key concepts. And so my hope with these little webinars is just with each one to introduce you to an idea, give you a little bit of a taste of it, an experience with it, and to give you a chance to kind of play with that and start your own journey of discovery in this area. So today, we're going to be looking at the difference between body perception and what the mind knows, conscious awareness. So the body is woven into the fabric of life. It's intrinsically part of life. It's not a separate thing. And our senses and perception on a physical level are often very different than what we actually can know, what our conscious mind knows. So we're going to explore that topic because the mind can take a holiday, but the body's always here. And then the other thing I want to explore is the way that our physical selves impact and literally shape each other's bodies. And I mean literally shape each other's bodies. That's how I can see who you're with. It's not that I just see you, but I see who's on the other side of that characteristic that you have. Terry Real, the couples therapist, has a saying that I really like. He says, "Show me the thumbprint and I'll show you the thumb." And so I've learned to see the thumb, basically, who's on the other side of your facial expression that you constantly, your common facial expression, who's on the other side of your posture, who's on the other side of your breathing, on the other side of the way you use your voice. How did all of those things come to be, and what's the story that they're telling? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a theory behind this and try to illustrate that and give you a way to kind of poke at it yourself. And we'll see where this takes us. So I like to use slides. I know that people don't remember things if I talk very much, so I'm going to try and illustrate it. So there's a little more to hang on to. So bear with me for a moment while I actually change over to my slideshow. One thing I'm not is very good with the text stuff anymore, but let's just see here. Okay, so here we go. PowerPoint is up. Let's see, people are still coming in. There we go. Share screen. Here we go. It's going to come up looking kind of weird at first, but then I will change my view here. Let's see. It's going to let me. So I'm starting here with a question for you. And the question I have for you to think about is if you've ever been with somebody, maybe somebody that you just met, and you had the feeling that that person really got you, like you just, as we say, like hit it off, or you had this instant connection to them. And I want you to think of a specific example, like a time when you were with somebody, or maybe there's somebody that's in your life that you feel like that person just, they get me. They really understand me. So once you think about that specific encounter or that specific person, I want to invite you to think about what happened, what made that work the way it did, what made that work for you, and what did they do or not do, and what did you do or not do that that made that such a rewarding experience. Yeah, people are still coming in here. And I'd love to have a few of you just, let's see if I can get the chat where I can see it. Just maybe put a few comments in the chat. If I can get it to show for me. Yeah, it's not showing. Just what was it about that experience that that made it really feel good for you? Let's see, there we go. Let's see if authenticity, somebody says, they didn't pretend, right? What else was it about that experience that made it really kind of meaningful for you? No, the person asked clarifying questions, and then they took the time to actually listen to what you said. Very nice. Somebody who didn't have expectations, they were honest and playful. I was relaxed. I was in a receptive place, which isn't always the case. Sometimes I build walls. Sure. What are some of the things that happened or didn't happen that made that experience feel so good to you? Any other comments on that one? So, as you really think it through, like you're watching the video, I could relax. Yeah, that's really important. Relaxation is key, feeling listened and heard. Okay, cool. They saw and described me the way I see myself at my best. How nice is that? We don't often get that reflection. That's really lovely. Yeah. So I have another question for you. And that question is, have you ever been with somebody that didn't get you? Like really didn't get you? And maybe it's somebody in your world right now, I don't know. But what was it about that encounter that gave you that experience? So think of a specific example, an encounter where somebody just didn't get you. It was like, it didn't work. They wanted me to be a certain way. Somebody says it's common. They don't get me. Oh, yeah. What else? What was it that really made you feel like you don't get it? Like, you don't get me. It's not happening, right? Anyone else? What happened that made it feel like that for you? They projected their own experience on me, didn't see me as I am. They assumed my personality or my intent, so they already started with an idea about you. They weren't present, for sure. Yeah, sure. All of these things can kind of give us that sense of dissonance. You felt uneasy in your body and had an impression that there were two realities there. Or they were talking about themselves and they never were curious about you, and you waited and waited and waited to be seen and say something. Right. They had some objective, they had an agenda, and they put me in a box that I couldn't get out of. That sounds really uncomfortable. Yeah. They didn't adore me, right? I love that one. Okay, right. They weren't in love with you. They were just doing something else, right? For sure. Right? These are all experiences we have that create a sense of dissonance. And what I'd like to explore with you today is actually the physical behind this, the actual physical things. And I want to start by changing our language just a little bit. We use the word body, and unfortunately, for most of us, the word body has a certain kind of resonance. It sounds like this sort of inanimate object, right? And it's true. When I look in the mirror, my body appears to me as an object, right? or your body, if I'm looking at you, appears to me as an object, as a thing in the world. But I prefer to use the Greek word soma. Instead of this sort of inert object like a body, a table, and a chair, this kind of way that we feel about that word, I like the word soma because it's a Greek word that means the living, intelligent body in its wholeness. And I took this definition from Thomas Hanna's beautiful little book, The Body of Life. The first 2 chapters are really wonderful. He's the founder of a bodywork process called somatics. And the point that he makes is that soma, our physical selves, are not a thing. They're not an objective body. They're an unfolding process. They're always in relationship. They're always interacting with the world around us, and they're always being shaped by the world around us, including the other people there. So our bodies are in this process of exchange and interaction all the time. And our conscious mind, on the other hand, our story-making mind, is rather limited. Like if you've ever tried to remember a foreign phone number with all those extra numbers, you realize that our minds, our conscious minds, are a limited resource. They're a high energy cost. They take a lot of energy for us as human beings to keep that consciousness going. And our bodies, on the other hand, are, they're up to something else. If I threw a ball at you right now, like if I just tossed a ball, imagine I could do that, right? Before you really identified what it was, your body would organize to catch it. So body is fast, mind is actually slow. And there's research that backs it up. This is old research. It was done originally in the 40s and 50s. And what they did is they put people in front of a clock, and then they wired sensors to their muscles. And they asked people to push a button and to note the time on the clock when they intended to push the button. And the muscles to activate, to push the button, were about a half a second ahead of their awareness of when they were going to push the button. So the body was already organizing to push the button before their mind was actually aware of that. So this is why I say body is fast, it will organize, it has to be. The mind is actually slow. And for the most part, the world around us doesn't change. The furniture doesn't get up and walk around the room on its own, right? So most of the time, the world stays pretty stable for us. And we don't need to update. We can kind of go with whatever our understanding of where things are is, and we can get through the world pretty good. But if you've ever been used to things being in a certain place and come into a room and it's in a different place, you can find yourself tripping over a chair or tripping over a child's toy because your mind isn't actually present with that. Your mind is a little behind. So body is actually doing a whole lot of work for us, and our mind is making up the story that it's in charge. Good story. Very, very persuasive, right? It actually backdates the story to make sure that we think it's in charge. So the human body is incredibly complex. And in part of my dissertation, I was studying assistive technology. So these are places where people might have lost a limb and they're trying to replace the limb with something like a physical support. So it turns out that our bodies learn very quickly, like this little girl riding the trike. She's going to work her way out of those training wheels. That's not a mental instruction. That's body learning the world. And our bodies are designed for this. So we learn things and then we automate them. So as we are learning things, we're more aware of them, but then they go down into the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. So they become part of our lower brain. And this is a feature, not a bug. Because if you actually had to think about everything that you were going to say and do, like just imagine that any movement you made, you had to think about it to do it. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do that. You couldn't keep up with it, right? Nothing would happen. So automation is a feature, not a bug. But the things that we do, like picking up a cup, it took decades of research to be able to make an artificial hand that could pick up a cup and not crush it, right? The sensitivity we have in our bodies is astounding. So this physical self that you have is always perceiving the world, always in tune with it, always aware of other people too. So mind follows soma, not the other way around. And our ability to automate is incredible. So this is where we get things like flow states. So here's Michaela Schifrin sliding down some incredibly steep slope and not falling most of the time. This requires, so to be in this kind of flow, she's not thinking, she's not going, okay, now here comes the next gig. I need to get ready, right? She's in the flow. Her body is leading. And if her body isn't leading, she's probably going to crash. So to be in these kind of flow states requires training. It requires automation, right? We automate the things in our world. It requires responsiveness and presence, which is why if you feel that person is not present with you and not responding to the actual you in the moment, you're going to feel dissonance. You're not going to feel rapport with them. You're not going to get a flow from them, right? Now, we've had to automate things like language to talk to each other, right? So we don't have to think about every word we say. And we've had to automate things like smiles and breathing so that we can have that kind of conversation with somebody. But there's also a need for us to be present and be in that moment with each other, to be able to respond from that base of automated knowledge. It's that interaction and the flow of that makes us feel like people either get us or they don't. Now, automation has its good side, but it also has its bad side. And that is that we will automate the other people in our lives. We have an idea about who they are, and it's costly to be present with people all the time, so we'll automate them. And the studies show, for instance, that couples become worse at understanding each other over time instead of better. Because we often automate our partner fairly early, and that automation can be out of date, but it becomes our story, and that's the story we interact with that person from within. So people actually in couples read each other worse over time because they're using their automations. They're not in the present moment with their partner. So automation is good. It lets us do an awful lot of things in the world without thinking about them. And if we had to think about them, we'd never get anything done. And it also has a downside of that we're not necessarily present. We don't necessarily have the capacity to be present with people all the time. So we're often working out of our automations. And what happens when we're doing this over time, if this couple was doing this for 10 years, I guarantee you, if you looked at their faces when they started, a picture of their faces when they started, and a picture of their faces after that 10 years of fighting, you would see the fight on their face. It would become molded into their body, right? Because we've made that expression over and over and over again. And just like Michaela Schifrin going down that slope, we've practiced that and it's in our musculature. So our relationships show in our bodies. They show in our breathing, they show in our face at rest, they show in our voices. They're there all the time. I can find your family just with your body. It is there. Whoever you've been with the longest is going to be there. And this is what I call the social soma, right? This is the living intentional body being that's in relationship with other human beings. We're social primates. We need each other. But we also are always interacting and shaping each other. And if we can't find secure, functioning, peaceful ways to be with each other, we're going to have the effect of that on our bodies. So one of the things that makes us feel good with other human beings is if we have a sense of empathy. We have a feeling that they get us, right? That they understand us. And it turns out, as people have dived more deeply into what is empathy and how does it work, that there's actually two forms of empathy. There's probably more, but these are the two I've seen in the research. Now, the first one is cognitive, which means I can look at your face and surmise whether you're happy or sad or angry, right? And actually, psychopaths can do this. You don't have to have feelings or a conscience, right? Because they can see that you're sad and use that, right? So this is a mental representation of what I think you might be feeling, which is very different from affective empathy. That's feeling with. That's when I look at your sadness and I feel a resonant sadness. I feel some of that sadness. And that feels very different for us. Most of us, we can tell when somebody gets it in their head and somebody gets it in their heart, as we often will talk about. So we can tell the difference between cognitive empathy and affective empathy. And so I like to have this is my attempt to illustrate that. And I want you to imagine that these are like two tuning forks. Most of you know what the musical tuning fork is. It's this little metal thing that stands up. And if you bang one of them, it will start vibrating. And it will vibrate and it will move the air molecules. And if the other tuning fork is at the same frequency, it will also start to vibrate. So we can hear, and then this one will start. You can stop this one and this will be vibrating. Now that works great if we're on the same, quote, wavelength, right? We're at the same frequency. But if we have two tuning forks at different frequencies, we're going to get something called beats. We're going to get dissonance. This fork will be impacted by the first one and it will vibrate at its own frequency, but there will be these beats, a wong, 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 that you can kind of hear between them. And I think that's a good model for what happens a lot of times in relationships, where we might have a great, we're sort of on the same frequency, we're resonating with someone, we feel felt by them. And then there's people where we can't get into sync, we can't get in the groove with them, it doesn't line up. And it turns out, because I had a lot of teachers who have taught me with video, they've taught me to look and see and hear what is going on slowly, slowing down the tape, and then also quickly and seeing patterns over time. And when you use video, you see that those mirror neurons in our brain that people keep talking about, they need another body to resonate with. It's just like the tuning fork. They need another person to be in resonance with. And when we see people who feel like they're really in sync, we will see things like physical mirroring. Like here's two women smiling at each other. They're both holding cups in the same way. We'll see mirroring in gestures. We'll see mirroring in facial expression, posture, even breathing. People will begin to physically entrain with each other. And you can see this on video. You can see people just like drop into sync. We also hear this, we see this with prosody, which is the melody of the voice. People will shift their vocal tone, their pitch, their timbre, their tempo, their volume as they come into sync with each other, right? And people that don't do that, when we're not able to move towards each other in that way, we feel it. Other things that are a factor is shared culture. I've been studying some Aikido videos lately and the bowing, watching these guys like know how to bow together at the right moment. Like I would not know how to do that, right? And the distances that we keep, like when I'm with New Yorkers, I have to get used to being very crowded. I'm a Pacific Northwest girl. We have a lot of space out here, right? It's just all these things have to do with that felt sense of you're with me. It's somatic resonance. And there's also things like hidden rules. Like, what are the rules of my culture? Like in Western culture, we know that if you get into an elevator in this little box, you don't turn and look at the other people, you turn and look at the door, right? Most of us know, look at the door, because it's small and it's close and those eyeballs are a little threatening. So, all of these things go together to create this sense of felt sense of resonance, felt sense of you're with me, you get me, we're in tune. Timing matters a lot. People who have autism, who have, even developmental delays, things like that, Asperger's, they're off on these kinds of things. They can't get the timing. They don't know the hidden rules. They can't see you well enough. They may not read faces or see your face in the same way. They cannot get in sync. They don't have the hardware to do it. And we feel that. I mean, it's an uncomfortable feeling for us because we can't get into a groove with each other. So affective resonance, actually, if you want to be good at this, if you want to have people be able to be with people and have them feel like you get them, you need actually to have a lot of mobility. You need to have a fairly mobile spine, a fairly mobile face. You need to be fairly flexible. You need to be able to drop into presence, be present with them. And you need to be able to rely on your somatic perception, not your mind. If you've ever felt self-conscious with somebody, it's because you're trying to think through that slow mind to do something that your body should know, but perhaps doesn't know how to do. Like if you're in a different culture, and I traveled quite a bit for a number of years, I could feel it. I didn't know the rhythm. I didn't know the distance. I didn't pick up the cues, right? I could feel it. And they could feel it too, but fortunately I was the out-of-town special teacher, so I got a pass a lot of the time for not knowing the rules. But it is important to be able to have this response because most of our emotional experiences are in our viscera. They're vagus nerve, they're in the torso of the body. If we can't move, it's going to have an impact, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And interestingly enough, groups have resonance too. So I had one teacher who taught me to see waves in a group, to see that here that a group that is formed and aware of itself will limit how loud it gets. It'll hit a ceiling and come back down automatically. You don't have to manage the volume. It will pause about every 20 minutes. There'll be a little pause because we're aware of each other, even if it is not conscious. And we're modifying our relationships and our interactions to stay in the group. All of that is happening unconsciously, right? And it's really amazing. I had one circle one time where there was a woman sitting opposite me who was very stiff. And I would watch these little movements. Somebody would scratch, somebody would move their paper, the next person would change their feet. I would watch this little wave of movement until it hit her. And then it would go thud, right? And then something might start on the other side of the group, and then it would go thud, right? The group couldn't actually feel itself as a whole because this person was not able to move. And this is what I call body blindness or body armor. And so you may be an old softy inside, but if your body is armored, if you have habitual patterns of holding or blocking, you will not be free to resonate with certain kinds of people, unless they have armor too, and then you can like hook up and be right, the same armor pattern. But it's this idea of like for us to be in resonance with each other, that has a physical substrate. That's a physical thing. If we have had trauma, if we have had injury, like my dear sweet husband has a bit of body blindness because he hurt his back as a young man, and so he's very rigid. He's really not much fun to tango dance with, let me tell you. He can't move there. It's not that there's anything wrong with his back now, but that habit of that holding has blocked not only his ability to do tango, but his ability to feel me, to actually be in emotional resonance with me. He cannot move, right? He can't move in the viscera where we feel. So the other thing that can happen, I had a client that taught me a lot about this, and she had what I call slack face. Her face was like this immobile mask. And I kept thinking, what? I tried to get a rise out of her, right? I tried to get some reaction from her. And it turned out that when she was a youngster, most of her childhood, her alcoholic father would have these rages fairly frequently, like a couple times a week. And he would line up the kids and he would yell and lecture at them. And if they twitched, he would come after them. So she learned to have this kind of flat affect, right? And she's a lovely, warm person, but it's a problem. You wouldn't necessarily know that about her when you met her. So this is what I call body blindness. We have body armor, but it also means that we don't have the freedom to resonate in that area that we have blocked and protected. And we either block from the outside, like this story I told about the alcoholic father, or we have feelings inside. People may have shamed you or made you feel bad about yourself, and we'll armor up to avoid feeling those feelings from the inside. So it turns out that feeling our feelings is good. If we want to be a human being and we want to be in connection with other people, we may need support and care to do that. But secure, functioning people are relaxed. They're comfortable in their bodies, in the world. When we're insecure, we have tension. We're afraid. And that's going to show up in our freedom and our ability to interact with people. So I wanted to, so just thinking about body resonance and thinking about your own armor and thinking about people you've been with. And it's really easy. Our minds will quickly make up a story if we're not able to create that somatic resonance with somebody. The mind is speedy in that regard, right? We'll make a story about who that person is and why they're so hard to be with and whatever, right? But there may be a whole different thing going on for them. The reason that our bodies don't find resonance, that we don't find that groove together. And I think it's helpful to kind of have this idea and be curious about, why is that person affecting me this way? Or why am I affecting them that way? Right? And to think about how we're showing up and how they're showing up, and what the stories are behind that, what the lived experiences are that have led to each of us to that moment in time. There's so much that people are showing you. It's not like there's too little information. For most of us, there's too much. We just kind of filter out a lot of it. But people are telling us their story all the time. And one story I tell to illustrate this, and then we're going to do a little learning activity together. In my previous home, I had a workshop space, and people had to come up the stairs and make a turn to come into the room. And in that moment where we're coming into a new space and we're making a turn, we usually drop our facade. We have to actually see where we are. So we're going to drop our mask for a moment. And as this gentleman came up the stairs, I just happened to be looking at the stairway. And there was this moment where this deep sadness flashed across his face. And then this cheery mask came up and he came in and we had a nice talk. And he was actually working. It was a working group that day. And when he sat down beside me, I said, you're a lovely person. I'm enjoying getting to know you. And just a moment ago, when I saw you come up the stairs, I saw an incredible sadness on your face. And I hope you don't mind if I ask about that. And he brought a business case that, his businesses weren't doing well. When I mentioned that, his face changed. And the sadness, he was able to be congruent with what was really true for him. And it turned out that his businesses had not done well since he had lost his 16-year-old son in a car accident. And the son had been driving that day. Some friends had gone to the coast, they'd played hard and come home. There was no alcohol or anything. But his son had been the driver, and the other parents, four kids died that day in that accident. And the other parents had sued him. And he'd lost his business because of it. And he'd never really recovered. And because of the lawsuits, he had not been allowed to grieve. He had to buck up, present a face, show in there. So we actually were able to do ceremony for him to help him really release some of that grief. And he looked different afterwards. Some of the tension lines in his face had shifted, his breathing had shifted, his shoulders were in a different position. It shifted him for us to actually make space for that and to hold that with him. I once did, and Valley's here, she knows this, I once did a workshop down in California, and there was a woman there who came up to me afterwards and she said, I think this is a beauty treatment. I'm noticing how much more relaxed people's faces are after you finish. Like, I never thought about that. But Los Angeles, of course, right? It does, it changes us, right? When the stories that we've been holding in our bodies can be held in community, can be held and received and reflected. We don't need to hold them so strongly in our physical self. So I want you to play with this a little bit. And here's our last little bit here. I'm gonna read you a rather silly story, if I can get it up here. And I'm gonna read the same story twice. It's a short story. The first time I read it, you are going to cross your arms, cross your legs if you can, and clench your jaw, okay? And I'll read the story. And then the second time that you read this, I read this story to you, you're gonna just do it in your normal posture. So let me just get the story up before you get too clenched here. And let's see if I can find that here. Here we go. Here it is. All right. So here goes the story. Everybody get yourself wrapped up. Get your jaw nice and tight there. Okay, so just notice how it is to hear this story. I was gifted with a new way of seeing the day I got mugged underwater. I had been filming creatures living in the great African sea forest off the coast of South Africa about a year ago when my camera was grabbed straight out of my hands by a young octopus thief. Wrapping her arms around her bounty, she zoomed backward across the ocean floor. This was not the first time I'd found myself at the mercy of an 8-armed robber. A couple of years earlier, another curious octopus had stolen the wedding ring off my wife's finger, never to be recovered. Octopuses love shiny things. Peering into their dens, I've found earrings, bracelets, spark plugs, glasses, and a toy car with a revolving cylinder that the octopus spun round and round with its suckers. As I wondered how to get my camera back without alarming my young friend, something surprising happened. She turned the camera around and began to film my diving partner and me. The intriguing images that she captured, videos of her own arms draped over the camera lens with our bodies in the background, had a profound effect on me. After many years filming octopuses and hundreds of other animals that call the sea forest their home, for the first time, I was seeing the world and myself from her perspective. That's the end of the story. Now you get to stretch, you get to release all that, you get to open your jaw, you get to shake some of that off, get yourself settled, let that out, right? Okay, get yourself settled. And I'm going to tell the same little story again. And I want you to notice how it's different to hear it like this. All right, here we go. I was gifted with a new way of seeing the day I got mugged underwater. I had been filming sea creatures living in the great African sea forest off the coast of South Africa about a year ago when my camera was grabbed straight out of my hands by a young octopus thief. Wrapping her arms around her bounty, she zoomed backwards across the ocean floor. This was not the first time I'd found myself at the mercy of an 8-armed robber. A couple of years earlier, another curious octopus stole the wedding ring off my wife's finger, never to be recovered. Octopuses love shiny things. Peering into their dens, I've found earrings, bracelets, spark plugs, sunglasses, and a toy car with a revolving cylinder that the octopus spun round and round with its suckers. As I wondered how to get my camera back without alarming my young friend, something surprising happened. She turned the camera around and began to film my diving partner and me. The intriguing images that she captured, videos of her own arms draped over the camera lens with our bodies in the background, had a profound effect on me. After many years filming octopuses and hundreds of other creatures that call the sea forest home, for the first time, I was seeing the world and myself from her perspective. Now, if you compare your experience of the first time hearing that story with the second time that you heard that story, what was the difference? What was that like? I'd love to hear from a few people, so if you want to share what the difference was for you, go ahead and unmute your mic. Yes, please, Ursula. Yeah.
This was amazing. The first time I couldn't follow this story.
Mm-hmm.
I felt frustrated.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I was thinking, what is she talking about? What is this nonsense? So this was really interesting. And the second time I could follow everything. I could see the things in front of me. I could see what happened. Yeah, so amazing. Thank you very
The
much.
difference. Yeah. Yeah. Nancy, what about you? What's your experience?
Yeah, I echo what Ursula said. Like the first time, I'm like, what? It's just octopus and what? Like I could not make sense of your story. And
Uh-huh.
also a question, did you read it in the same tone?
I did my best.
Okay, so to me, they sounded totally different.
Yes.
Like the enunciation, everything sounded totally different. And then the second time I was able to let it in my heart. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's the octopus that was filming them. Oh, that's so cute.
Right. Yeah.
First, yeah, the first time, just like Ursula, I was so annoyed by the end of the
Yeah.
story.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, this is really good. Thank you.
Right. Imagine if this is your client, the wrapped up one, how they're hearing you, right? Or if you're having that day, how you're hearing them, right? And what happens if this becomes chronic? What happens if this becomes built into the tissues? So this little story, I mean, just this little experiences, thank you for both sharing for that. It's just a taste of what goes on all the time. So if we've lived with a critical parent and our shoulders are like this, up around our ears, and our jaws clenched and our breathing is collapsed and shallow, and I come in and we're trying to work on an issue and this is your body, it's telling me a story. I need to deal with that first. I'm not going to get to you until I get past that. Now, it turns out, and this is a word of caution, that when we work with people's bodies, it is very direct. We go deep, we go fast, we go in hard. And I have learned over the years by making mistakes to be very gentle, to be very kind, to pace people very carefully when I go in and I'm reflecting physical things. And I've learned to pick the things that really matter and not be distracted by things that don't. So I'm just wanting you to start to look. I'm wanting you to start to do more than just make up a story about what's happening when you're with somebody. I'm wanting you to really be curious. What led to this? If somebody is showing up with armor, who else was there? What was the armor in response to? I want you to think about it from a systems point of view, right? If I'm seeing the thumbprint, what's the thumb? What led this to be like that, this body posture to be like that? So there's just so much information that people are giving us. They are really, truly telling us our story the whole time. One of my colleagues told me a most amazing story. She works in pre and perinatal, so she's working with early trauma. And she had a little child that she was working with who was an IVF baby. So he'd been, fertilized in a petri dish. That was how he got started in the world. And he kept wanting toys. He wanted stuffed toys. And so finally, they just put the kid in a room with these stuffed toys. And the kid very deliberately picked 6 of these toys and put them around himself. And it turns out there had been 7 embryos in that dish. And when the other 6 were there, he felt complete. So, the story is always there. There's so many stories like that we could tell, but we don't listen. We don't listen to the soma. We prize the mind. But the real stories of the heart are always here in the flesh. They're physical. So I hope that today in this little tiny short webinar, I have piqued your curiosity. And you are going to start looking and listening with your eyes and listening with your ears and your heart and your own body. I have a few minutes left for questions, so I'd be happy if you want to put a question in the chat or just put up your hand and I'll unmute you. But I would love to hear if there's any questions about this work that anyone is sitting with. Or not. I'm not seeing any. I hope you have questions. I hope there's questions stirring in your heart there someplace. And I hope that this has been a useful little glimpse into a world that I've really learned to inhabit over the last couple of decades and be very interested and very curious. Would it have made a difference if we had been open first and then closed up? It is different either way. But what I've found in terms of teaching is if we open, our first rejection of the story makes our ability to hear it more impactful. So, because we're thinking, what is that annoying person going on about? And then we go, oh, that was a nice little story, right? And that contrast is really helpful. If we go, oh, that was a nice little story. Oh, now I'm just annoyed. It doesn't have quite the same impact, so I do it that way. But it does, either way, it's different. We don't hear the same. Literally, when you clamp your jaw, it affects your ears. You can't hear the same. So it actually changes the structure in there. So I will definitely share the recording for those of you that missed it. So if you registered, you'll get a link to the recording. And bear with me for just, if you stay on for just a little bit more here. Let's see if I can get my mouse to behave here. It's not behaving very well. Let's try that. Those of you who are interested in this kind of stuff, let's see here. Come on. This is not my strength, obviously. I am teaching a masterclass. The topic is floor work, but really we're looking at bodies in space and the stories that body tell us when we put reps on the floor, we put objects down. So pattern is hugely illustrative for us. There are, once I see something on the floor, once I see the bodies, I know where to start. I know how to go through a constellation. I know what the order is. I know where to move people because I've learned to see and read and work with what bodies are telling me. And to see relationship out of this. It's incredible work for couples. You can see the problem within the first few minutes. It's all there on the reps' bodies. It's also there on the clients' bodies. So I can't transmit a lot of this online. I need you there with me in front of the video camera where we can actually see things. But I am teaching this 4-day class, The Art of Collaborative Change, working on the floor with representatives' bodies. And I would love for you to come if you can, and if not, to share the word. I'm doing a series of master classes this year, so I can do some live and in-person things. The first one was chair work, was the interview, the inquiry. The second one is the art of collaborative change. Each one of these is followed by a little workshop. And this workshop following this one is power and group dynamics. And we're looking at how that gets transmitted in bodies in relationship. So it's a very embodied piece of work. The third masterclass is the art of creative transformation. And this is like innovating. So this would be like, how are all the different ways you can apply parts and pieces of constellation work? For me, it's like this endlessly creative toolkit that I can use. I can do all kinds of things with it. So I want to share that with people. We can play and innovate. And then the workshop that goes with that is the 1-day workshop that follows that is voices within and without. How to effectively use imaginative elements in constellation work. Very often people put in, my favorite of this is like a mother and a daughter, the daughter saying, I feel fear, and they're going to put in the fear. And I'm like, no, the fear is the byproduct of the relationship. If you look at the relationship and you change that, the fear will change. You do not need the fear. So teaching people how to use these elements effectively is the point of that workshop. And I see a lot of use of imaginative elements in constellation work that actually dilutes it, that makes it less potent. And so I'm wanting to really be able to share what I know about that. The last one is my all-time favorite, is the art of working somatically. It is exactly what we've been doing here in spades. So it is using somatic signals, working with them, seeing them, using your own body as a way to work with that. We'll be doing somatic imaging and more. It's one of my favorite topics. And the workshop that goes with that, along with my colleague Mary Seamster, who's an expert in pre and perinatal trauma, is imprints, which is working with birth and early childhood trauma. So she'll be joining me to do that workshop. So we'll be working on that. So those are our offerings this year, and I would love to have you come if you can, and share the word if you can't. And if you have signed up for this workshop, you'll get these slides, so you'll be able to have this information. And last but not least, bring your mind home. Your body misses you. Be present. All right, everybody. I will stop sharing. And yep. Lovely to see you all. Please spread the word. The body is always telling stories, and we need to listen. We need to use that information. And thank you very much for coming, for attending. So, yeah, take care. Okay, bye-bye.